We've been in a series called Simple But Not Easy here at church, where we've been asking ourselves, are we willing to follow Christ? And oftentimes, the answer is simple, yes. But how do we do it? Not so easy. And the question of this Easter weekend is, will you believe what you have heard? Because there are people around us in our world that are like, sweet 4-day weekend, let's go fishing. Nothing wrong with fishing. Will you believe what you have heard? But what I like about the New Testament story of Jesus' death and resurrection, I won't do too many of them, but it's great, is there are multiple people who saw parts of the story and they all had different reactions. You see, it starts off with our friend, loose word, Pontius Pilate. Jesus, at the beginning of the story, is taken to Pontius, the Roman governor of Judah, a man under pressure to prove his loyalty to Caesar, a man keen to shine for Rome. And some stuff had gone on in the background, and his place was a little bit, And Pilate finds himself encountering a Jewish man, making a law and a ruling on a Jewish man, which he shouldn't be doing, who he can find no fault in. And as a way around it, he offers this man to the crowd and they scream out, "Crucify him!" And the worst thing is, if he refuses to give in to their demands, there may be a riot and then Caesar will hear it, and then what happens to him? Pilate tries to release Jesus and presents this other man, Barabbas. And they even give Jesus the severe beating to appease the crowd. But even then they make his position clear. Either you kill Jesus or you are no friend of Caesar. Pilate gives in and allows them to crucify Jesus, the innocent man. And he washes his hands over any blood that would be spilt that day. As we think about the story of Pilate, Pilate saw the truth, but it would not interrupt his comfort, and it would not interrupt his world. That I be not Pilate, whose heart is so hardened against the rule of Christ. As we go through these little homilies, we'll be introduced to a different character each time. That I be not Pilate, whose heart is hardened so against the rule of Christ. Then there was the thief on the cross. The soldiers mocked him and came to him and offered him sour wine. "If you are the king of the Jews," they said, "save yourself." And upon him was posted the inscription, "This is the King of the Jews." And one of the criminals who hung there heaped abuse on him. "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself. Save us." But the other one there rebuked him, saying, "Do you not even fear God, since you are under his same judgment? We are punished justly, for we are receiving what our actions deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said to Jesus, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Truly you will be with me in paradise." We are not told what this criminal did or stole to be convicted in such a bloody way. But whatever it was worthy, the Romans said, of the most severe punishment. A crime so terrible, though, the man recognized Jesus. He recognized something in him and of him, that there would be goodness and mercy. And he turns to him and says, "Where you are going, please let me come with you." In Jesus' death on the cross, he promises to the sinner that he would be with him in paradise. And in this move, there is this compassion, not just for the whole of the world that was to come, but for the person right next to him. The criminal asked to belong, and Jesus, in his mercy, said, "You will be with me in paradise." So hear the words of mercy and forgiveness as Jesus welcomes me and you at the cross. We have the centurion. In Matthew 27:54, it reads that the centurion and those who were with him were guarding Jesus. And they saw the earthquake had happened and they were terrified, and he exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." The centurion, this great Roman soldier, recognized Christ over Caesar. The Roman centurion saw God finally. Not Caesar in Rome, not the one who held military power, but God himself who had chosen another way. He'd sworn an oath to Caesar, but now God himself obliterates this. And it all happens at the cross. The cross where Rome's power to banish life is most visible, where Caesar could just sign documents and say, "Take that one away." Caesar, the God of this world, has made this cross as a form of ultimate punishment. It was an implement of his power. So God picks that spot to reveal himself to a Roman. The centurion recognized Christ over Caesar. At the cross, the power to kill gets turned onto itself and becomes this great display of the power of what God can do. Jesus now is revealed in all his glory to become God. He picks the place where Rome's greatest power is now used against him. Caesar used the cross to present his authority, and Christ uses it to undermine it in this very wonderful way. So God was showing that everything he said and did and will do is true. God used a Roman centurion, the wrong person, it seems, but the right person to show us who he is. The Roman centurion recognized Christ over Caesar. Oh, that I would recognize the true God of this world with my lips and my heart. But as we move forward, there is this question. There is something more that has been done. We realize the gift of Christ in his death, but what about in his resurrection? We can believe a death very easily. It's not hard to die when you're nailed on a cross. Let's not try it. But the resurrection is something more we need to believe. Will you believe what you have heard? And what will you do with it? In John 21-16, there is the story of Mary Magdalene. And Mary stood outside the tomb crying. And as she wept, she bent over to look inside the tomb. And she saw two angels, one dressed in white, seated where the body had been, and the other one at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I do not know where they have put him." And at this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not recognize it was him. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" And thinking it was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go to him." And Jesus says to her, "Mary." And she turns out and cries out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Mary remained a servant even when her hope had been dashed. We are now in this part of the resurrection story. Thank you. And it wasn't Mary Magdalene who had betrayed Jesus the day before. It wasn't Mary Magdalene who'd hightailed it out of there and hidden when things got tough. But she stood with another couple of women at the cross, and she waited to see where Jesus' body would be buried. And she came to his tomb while it was still dark, a servant even when her hope had been dashed. And there she wept. And she did not recognize Christ until he spoke her name, but then she turned at the sound of him, and it was him. A deeply faithful and deeply flawed woman. This is who Jesus called and chose to be the first witness of his resurrection. It was she who Jesus commanded to go and tell of the great story that he is not there, but he is risen. Mary remained a servant, even when her hope had been dashed. My heart's cry is this: make me like Mary Magdalene, who is present and attentive to the voice of you, Jesus. Do you want to be present and attentive? Do you know the voice of the Lord, that when he calls your name, you recognize it and turn to him? This is a great story of our faith, but what will you deal with this? Will you believe what you have heard? Will you believe that Jesus calls you by name and welcomes you into his family? Perhaps you're a bit like John the disciple. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw the stone had been rolled away. And she came running to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken him out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." The stories differ through the Gospels a bit. Stay with me. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb, but they were running, and the other disciple outran Peter. I'm sure he enjoyed that. And he reached the tomb first. And he bent over and he looked at the strips of linen, but he did not go in. Was John fitter, perhaps? More excited to see what was going, perhaps? He ran, outstripping Peter. He had heard the news from Mary Magdalene, what is going on, and so he ran. John was not indifferent to what was going on. He wanted to know. John was willing to believe that something had happened, but when he got to the tomb, he stopped. And was it out of fear, or was it out of confusion? He pauses at this empty grave and sees the grave clothes and assumes that something has happened. Maybe he is still there and Mary is wrong, because no one leaves the grave clothes behind. You can't take the body and leave the clothes. And so perhaps in his pain or doubt or fear, he pauses, full of hope, but still caught in the mechanics of this world where if someone is dead, they stay dead. From verse 9 of the same chapter, John writes of himself that they, being him and Peter, did not understand the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Are you willing to believe, but the mechanics of this world says death is death and things are final? Are you willing to claim the resurrection, this wonderful miracle that our world says, impossible? Oh, that we, knowing you, would have the width and depth of the victory won in your death and resurrection. Perhaps you identify with Peter. Peter carried on with his world. Having met Jesus, he left it. And then he witnessed the death of his friend. He saw the empty grave clothes and he carried on. Maybe not knowing what to do now. Something has happened, but what do I do with it? He went fishing. He went back to his old life. He knew what to do fishing. Put the net in, pull it up. Put the net in, pull it up. What do you do when the man you have followed for 3 years and hoped and believed in is dead? Peter had seen and heard just like others had seen and heard, and then he moved on to his old life. Oh, Peter. And Jesus meets him. Jesus meets him after his resurrection, and at this point, Peter has to face some really painful truths. That he had denied Christ. That everything in his great energy, I will never deny you. And Jesus meets him. When they had finished eating, Jesus says to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he says. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. And Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus says, take care of my sheep. Peter, he's got to be feeling it. And then the third time, he says to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. When Jesus met Peter on the beach, Peter had denied him 3 times. But Jesus didn't confront him or make him feel small. Jesus didn't hold a grudge for years. He did not ask him to grovel or plead in the sand or order him to go and work out his forgiveness. When Peter met Jesus on the beach, after he had denied knowing him 3 times, Jesus asked him 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And then he gave him a new start and a fresh beginning. Come, feed my sheep. Be my disciple again. Follow what I have taught you. And when we meet Jesus each morning after our own ups and downs, Jesus doesn't confront us or make us feel small. He doesn't hold grudges. He doesn't ask us to grovel in the sand and to plead. And he doesn't tell us to work hard for our own forgiveness. Peter had to face some painful truths in his life. Oh, to know the mercy of Christ, who not only forgives us, but calls us into this new life. Will you believe what you have heard? And who will you be? Will you be Caesar, where the truth is inconvenient to what you want to do with your life? Are you the thief on the cross who wants to belong and is offered it? Are you the centurion who finally sees the God of this world and now puts away the gods, little g, of this world? Are you Mary Magdalene, the faithful servant who calls and watches and waits and then turns at the sound of your name being called by the great God? Are you John, who is eager but a little bit afraid of what will happen next? Or Peter, who has made some bold statements, now needs forgiveness and restoration to live this life of God? Oh, to know the mercy of Christ, who not only forgives us, but calls us to new life. This is what we celebrate. Yes, Jesus' death that covers our sins and makes a way for us to know the Father, but also this new life in his resurrection, where we, being found in him, are raised again, made new creations. Perhaps you think, Shelley, you've been a bit mean. Perhaps your heart says, oh, there's a bit of Peter going on. Maybe you're a bit like John, where you're ready for a wonderful miracle, but afraid of what it might mean. Perhaps you long to be like Mary Magdalene, who hears the voice of God calling you. There is time and space for you to speak to God, and there is time and space for you to worship him today. That is your choice.